We recently got this absolutely fascinating theological puzzle sent in from a viewer. I've got to say, the source material takes us down a rabbit hole I genuinely was not expecting. We're talking about a deep dive into the text that asks a pretty major, honestly kind of disruptive question. Does Scripture actually contradict itself about the rapture? It's like a giant puzzle that forces us to re-examine some really deeply held interpretations. So let's just jump right in. Okay, let's dive into this. We're looking at what is probably one of the most famous passages in the entire Bible, straight out of the book of John, chapter 14, verses 2 and 3. You've almost certainly heard it. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. I will come again and receive you onto myself. Right? For generations, almost all of Christendom has viewed this specific passage as a definitive, ironclad promise of the rapture. But our source today raises a really compelling and honestly kind of disruptive question. Is this actually the rapture? Because think about it. If this passage in John 14 really is Jesus teaching his followers about the rapture, well, the source argues we've got a massive theological contradiction on our hands. Literally a complete scriptural collision. To really grasp this contradiction, the source points us straight to the Greek term mysterion. The Apostle Paul uses this exact word over in 1 Corinthians 15:51 to describe the rapture. And here's the thing. A mysterion isn't just, a tough riddle for you to solve. In this biblical context, it means a complete, unadulterated secret. We're talking about something that had never been revealed before, and crucially, was never prophesied anywhere else in earlier scripture. And right there, that is where our primary conflict arises. See, Paul explicitly states, under divine inspiration, that the rapture is a previously unrevealed secret. But if we interpret John 14 as the rapture, then we have Jesus seemingly prophesying it years earlier. The source argues that, if Jesus is teaching the rapture back in John 14, then God effectively betrayed the secret way before Paul ever revealed it. And according to the framework the source uses, God just doesn't work that way, and Scripture does not contradict itself. So how on earth do we resolve this tension? Well, we start with clue 1, identifying the audience. To do this, the source uses a method called rightly dividing the scriptures, basically looking at exactly who is being addressed in the text. Jesus isn't speaking to the modern church here, right? He's speaking directly to his apostles, and we have to remember their context is incredibly intense. These guys had given up absolutely everything to follow him, and in return, they were promised 12 thrones to judge the 12 tribes of Israel in what they completely expected to be an immediate earthly kingdom. It's kind of like, imagine you're an employee who devoted 3.5 years to climbing this corporate ladder, working night and day, believing entirely in your boss. Then, right before you reach the top to get your promised reward, your boss suddenly drops the bombshell that he's going to die. That is the level of profound devastation and confusion these apostles were experiencing in this exact moment. And it's exactly into that heavy, highly emotional, and confusing atmosphere that Jesus speaks those famous words, "Let not your heart be troubled." When we actually understand the specific audience, we see that Jesus is actively reassuring these deeply distressed apostles. He's looking right at these 12 men and telling them, hey, my promise to you, that promise of ruling the kingdom on those 12 thrones, it isn't over, despite his impending death. Which naturally brings us to clue 2, lost in translation. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the source points out that the English used in the 1611 King James Bible differs wildly from the English you and I use today. Take the word awful, for example. If you were standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon back in the 1600s, you might look at that massive drop and say, I am awful. And back then, that meant you were literally full of awe. But today, if you say you feel awful, it means you feel horrible or you're physically sick. The word itself hasn't changed at all, but the meaning has completely transformed over the centuries. And that brings us to the real linguistic breakthrough of this whole puzzle, the word mansion. In 1611, when the King James Bible was translated, a mansion simply meant a dwelling place or an abode. The translators hit the nail on the head for their time period. But today, obviously, we hear mansion and our brains immediately picture a sprawling luxury home or some massive Hollywood estate. But according to the source, Jesus wasn't promising the apostles modern luxury real estate. He was promising them very specific dwelling places. All right, moving right along to clue number 3, my Father's house. Because if these are dwelling places, the obvious question is, where exactly are they located? Well, the source connects my Father's house to the future physical reality of the New Jerusalem. And to fully grasp what that means, you have to look at the massive scale described by the source. We are talking about a physical structure that is 1,400 miles wide, 1,400 miles long, and 1,400 miles high. That is, honestly, an absolutely colossal domain. So, connecting the dots here, the source argues that this massive future domain is the exact location where those 12 thrones will be set up for the apostles to rule the 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus is essentially telling them that he's going ahead to prepare specific dwelling places right inside this massive 1,400-mile structure. He's ensuring that the apostles have a designated place to reside so they can eventually, finally, take those promised thrones. And this brilliantly illustrates our final section, the resolution, bringing the clues together. When we pull all of this together, the precise audience, the corrected translation, and that massive geographic location, things become so much clearer. See, during the rapture, as described by Paul, believers are caught up to meet the Lord in the air. But, as the source notes, when Jesus returns for these specific apostles to establish the kingdom, he's going to physically descend to the exact place he left from, the Mount of Olives. And a physical descent to a mountain, that points heavily toward the event of the second coming, not the rapture. So, the crucial point is, instead of the common interpretation that John 14 is talking about the rapture for the modern church, the source concludes, based on this method of rightly dividing the text, that it is actually describing the second coming and the specific reward promised to the apostles. By viewing it this way, the source argues that we preserve Paul's mystery of the rapture perfectly. It remains a completely unrevealed secret right up until Paul actually writes about it, which ensures there's absolutely no contradiction in Scripture. It all fits together. It's just a fascinating look at how digging deeply into a text can shift our entire perspective, which leaves us with a pretty compelling final thought to ponder. How does understanding historical context and the evolution of translation shape your understanding of ancient texts? It really goes to show that sometimes taking that extra step to investigate can unlock entirely new meanings in the words we thought we knew best. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those great questions, and I'll catch you on the next one.